Hey everyone, Jeff Lee here, Cine Gear 2017, with a very familiar face. You might, of course, it's Mitch Gross, now cinema specialist over at Panasonic.
Cinema product manager.
Oh, sorry, product manager. I'm still using your old specialist title from back in Able days.
I specialize in many things.
Yeah, exactly. Very exciting. First of all, Cine Gear, a new announcement about cameras is already kind of rare to begin with. This year marks the beginning, I think, of a new trend, the new EVA1.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if it's a new trend as much as a coincidence of just when we were so happen to get stuff done. Right. It might just kind of be that too. We'll see how maybe next year. But here is the EVA1, the AU-EVA1 or EVA1.
So we know it's obviously pre-released. There's only so much information you can reveal, but let's go over the big highlights. Right away, we know it's going to be large resolution. We know we're going to do some really interesting codecs internally and frame rates and such. Can you go a little bit into sort of the nitty-gritty of the actual recording options?
Sure. So it is a Super 35 sensor camera, and that sensor is actually not 4K like everyone has. It's actually more than that. It's a 5.7K resolution sensor. What are we doing with the 5.7K resolution? Well, you know, there have been people ever since Bayer pattern cameras first came out, have been like, well, you know, are you really getting a true 4K if you start at 4K and you do a Bayer pattern? So the answer to that is super sampling. If you start at about a 5.7K, that will yield a true, absolute, no argument to it, 4K resolution sensor. Basically, the more you start with, the more you're going to end up with. So we get 4K up to 60 frames per second, and we get 2K up to 240 frames per second internal recording on the camera. Now, we can do 10-bit 422, and we can do that recording at up to, you know, we have different recording formats, different codecs available, but you can do that up to 400 megabits per second.
So you guys call it Class 400, the AVC intro.
Right. So we're not saying exactly which formats yet. We're going to have that information soon, but you'll be able to get the appropriate SD cards because we're just recording on SDXC, so very affordable, very easy to get. You can stick it right into your laptop, don't have the special card reader, but if you don't have an SD card slot, you can buy one for just a few dollars, a little adapter. So it makes it not only inexpensive to buy the camera, but also inexpensive to use the camera moving forward. And we have 2 slots in there, so you can have, you know, a continuous recording and be able to span that.
Like, yeah, relay recording and the such.
Sure.
It's really interesting to me because as a previous DVX100 user, as an AF100 user, you've always started this trend of just this new form factor, the new recording options, and now you're kicking it off again with, like you just mentioned, 5.7K oversampling for 4K. Different lens mount options. This is an EF lens only, or?
This is an EF mount camera. Now, you know, it's funny you mentioned like the idea of like, you know, what is the form factor and style of a camera and stuff, because, you know, we have on our high end, we have the VariCam cameras, the fantastic top of the line cameras, you know, Netflix and Amazon use it, love them. And then on coming out of our consumer division, we have the GH5, and that camera, I mean, that camera is $2,000 and does so much, and it's amazing what you get out of this machine. But it also is, you know, it's a still style form factor and has certain physical issues that people have when they're shooting video because of that, and so the way you just interface with it. And we realized we had this sort of big gap in between those 2 areas, so we decided we want to really fill that gap as well as possible, but it's not just sort of plunk a thing down in there and it's like, well, you know, it's good for using on a drone or going to be as a B camera or whatever. Let's try all the different aspects to where you could fulfill that. So if you want to bump up, to grow from a GH5, we really stuff tons of functionality and features into a camera that's in the proper form factor to be able to, you know, really do video production work. And if you are shooting with our big brothers, or big sisters, the VariCams, and you want to be able to have a small camera to be as your B or C camera, or maybe it's going to go on a drone, you know, this top handle comes off and the side handle can come off, and so it becomes this tiny little box to go on a drone, to be on a gimbal, just be in the car rig, squeezed in this tight spot. EVA1 works really well for that as well. And it's going to have the V-Log, V-Gamut, and the same kind of color processing, color science, or colorimetry, whatever you want to call it, that gives that VariCam look, so that, which everyone loves, the beautiful skin tones and such. We really want to marry into the whole family of Panasonic cinema style cameras, so that you really can mix and match between what's appropriate for the work you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. You mentioned this too. You're taking the ability to grow from GH5 up, or taking some of the features, some of the best features out of the VariCam line, and bring them into this camera. So you've already announced dual native ISO. You've announced also support for RAW coming out the back end.
Right, now dual native ISO is something that I love telling people about, because a lot of people don't really understand what we mean by that. It's unique. So far, it's completely unique to Panasonic, and it's unique to the VariCams. This is the next camera to get it is the EVA1. What dual native ISO does for you is there's the way that all the manufacturers like sort of take information off the sensor, and that's our lower rating on the ISO of the camera. But then we have a special way that it's a proprietary way that fundamentally changes the way that we pull information out of the sensor. And what that gives you is all of the exposure, all of the same noise level, and all the dynamic range. You're not taking any punishment, not having to give up anything in order to gain additional exposure and have a brighter signal. On the VariCams, those two exposure points are 800 ISO and 5000 ISO. So that's a 2.6 stop increase in sensitivity with no additional noise and no loss of dynamic range, which is really pretty amazing. It's basically like having two different film stocks in your camera, right? We're not saying yet what it's going to be on EVA1. We've actually, we had some targets that we wanted to be able to hit, and we've been able to hit those targets, but we think that we're going to be able to tweak out a little bit more out of it. So we don't want to say a number. If I say X now, and then it turns out to be X plus 1, nobody's going to remember what the X plus 1 is. So we don't want to say that yet. Just like we're not saying exactly what the dynamic range is yet, because we think we can get even a little bit more when we do the processing. But it's going to be a very high performing thing with a feature that really is a very unique feature for these cameras.
I love showing that on the larger VariCams. When you show 4000 ISO versus 5000 ISO, when the new circuit kicks in, it's amazing.
Yeah,
the quality.
You see this huge jump in the image where you're like, wow, it just got beautiful. I mean, that's just amazing that you were able to shoot at this kind of light level. I mean, I just did some test footage where we just went out and shot New York City in the distance at night, and it's like, we were shooting available light, and I was stopping down on the lens because it was just like, this is too much, It's like, I don't want to see it like that. And we're demonstrating in our booth here where we have a room that we go in, and you literally are fumbling around in the darkness. It's so dim in there, and yet we have this bright, clear, beautiful image on the monitor. You can, you can shoot in crazy low light levels, but it also means I could be shooting nighttime exteriors at a deeper stop, so I have more focus range, more depth of field. Or I might be able to shoot with my favorite zoom lens in a situation where normally I'm stuck with shooting with a fast prime because I have no other way to be able to get the light level I need. In fact, there's one DP who was telling me that he decided to shoot on set, on a controlled lighting environment on a set, and shoot at the high ISO setting because what he was able to do is get his translight in the background off the set to blow out more so it looked more realistic as a daytime interior for a lit set. Right. And he's shooting a high ISO. It's a tool. You can use it in many different ways.
And what about the RAW aspect of it, coming also from the larger cameras? This will also support the Panasonic V-RAW as well.
Right. So I'm not sure if it's going to be a V-RAW or if it's another format of RAW, because this is a new sensor, the 5.7K. What we're going to have, the camera will come out in the fall, be under $8,000 is our target pricing, and that will come out initially with the internal recording, and then there will be a future firmware update coming, some months later, and then when that comes out, that will enable from the SDI port, you'll be able to switch it to be able to output the raw data as a 5.7K RAW. You'll be able to get that data out. And Atomos has already said that they're going to support it. And so we work with various third-party manufacturers to be able to record that raw data, as well as working with various post-production suites and equipment so that they can then process that information as well. There's a lot of ways you could go with that signal. And so we're working with people to explore, what they might choose to do with all that data. It's going to look really nice.
That's great. So speaking of SDI ports, there's SDI and an HDMI output. Both of those will support a 4K output?
Yes. We have an HDMI and an SDI, and they both can do 4K. They can both work simultaneously, which is very nice. There's XLR audio for inputs, and there's also a time code in and out. So that, if you want to be able to use this, again, we want to think of this as a scalable camera. You can go really, really small with it, and be able to use it for certain kind of shooting, or you can expand out, maybe even multi-camera, and be able to work with it in that fashion. So it's depending on the job you have, you can use it in different scales.
Mitch, thank you so much for giving us this first look. We know there's more to be coming, a lot more exciting announcements to be made in the near future. You said, again, availability is fall of this year?
This will be shipping in the fall, under $8,000, and before it comes out, we'll have much more information to share with everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. That's it for the Panasonic booth. I want to thank Mitch Gross again for joining us, giving us a look at the new EVA-1. That's it for now. Checking out of Cine Gear 2017. Take care.